The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or do they? Hello, welcome to the home front. Okay, so we've obviously reformatted things. This is actually welcome to the weekend as well. This is Saturday. So we recently did recording
See, this is what I was asking you about.
a recording of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Brought up an interesting couple of points. So, Star Trek episode coming soon. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say, yeah, we did our Star Trek episode. We're talking about the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films, and then we're going to do a follow-up episode that talks about the J.J. Abrams Star Wars ones, and we're just looking at, like, the ideas between, like, sequels and remakes and reboots, and it prompted a lot of, like, philosophical questions, as Star Trek always does. So now we want to interrogate one of those questions, but we have to be conscientious of YouTube time because you guys probably won't see that episode. So this will probably come first, which
This
is
is
weird.
gonna come first.
So think of this as like your preview for what's
Heyo.
more to come.
Stay tuned or whatever. So we're gonna try and keep this succinct because we we rambled on this for about 2 hours already.
Yeah, we did.
But there's a line in Star Trek famously that Spock says, and it's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I thought that was an oversimplified way of looking at the value of life, we'll call it.
Well, yeah, because you said I don't agree with that statement, and I was like, I don't agree with it either. And then it was like, oh, really? Because I think initially you read that and you think to yourself, well, of course the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. If you have 5 people that would die to save 500, wouldn't that be better? But we both disagreed with it, so now we're going to explore why we actually disagree.
Yep.
And it'll be a nice philosophical discussion for you.
And most of it's being kind of rambly, so we'll try and keep it succinct as possible. Okay.
Yeah. So what I thought he was saying when I first heard this, I thought he was just referencing the trolley problem, and I thought this was like a common phrase. But I think the origin just comes back to Spock in Wrath of Khan.
Yeah,
I couldn't find anyone else.
We looked around a little bit and we couldn't find at least the concept of that within that phrase.
Yeah.
So it brought up a couple of things like a platonic, but it was a completely separate issue. It was an interesting one, but it had nothing to do with the needs of the many and the needs of few within a context of human.
Yeah.
And then we encountered the trolley problem, which you brought up and equated, and it is similar. So we're just going to equate it to that and kind of work around that basis. So
Sure.
Would you like to explain the trolley problem to us?
Sure. So the trolley problem is this concept. I forget who designs it, but it's basically like you see a train coming down some tracks, and then there's 5 people on one track. Sometimes it's 20. So it just kind of depends on who's telling the story. But
I say the more the merrier.
yeah, especially in this story. But it can also deviate, and you can pull a lever to make the track go down a different path. But if it does, it's going to kill one person. And then it basically like builds on this idea of whether or not you would pull the lever. And it's initially like, oh, well, in reality, you wouldn't, even though, because like, your instincts would kick in and then your fight or flight responses, so you wouldn't be able to.
Right.
But like, mathematically, if you could just remove yourself from it and think about it hypothetically, you could say, yes, 5 people is more important than 1. And then it goes on to all these different variants, like you push someone who's very overweight over a bridge to block the train, and that somehow stops it. I don't want to get into the thicket of all of that, because I think like for me, I always felt like it was a very simple answer, because it's like you want me to answer it abstractly, but I'm like, it would never be abstract in real life. I would always know something else about the situation, and then that would determine my choice.
You have to include subjective reality. You have to. Because we're human beings. Subjective reality is a thing that dictates our decision.
Right.
So therefore, it renders it moot. It doesn't matter the objective morality of the thing. It matters what decision will be made.
Yeah. The only way you could do it is if you specifically set it up as an experiment and it was like a computer, and then it just said, there's 5 people, press this button to save 5 people, press this other button to save 1 person. Whichever one you save, the other will then die. The other or others will die.
But here's the thing. So my argument with that, this kind of goes into the Ender's Game problem, actually.
Oh,
Ender's Game
interesting.
is an excellent example of this because they make him think that it's all just an exercise. So he treats life as though it wasn't life. He just treats it like the simulation. Because to him, it's like, well, to reach this objective, you have to make sacrifices, and those sacrifices don't matter in a simulation. But then they tell him later that it's not a simulation, and he has to face the reality of the fact that he has sacrificed lives.
Spoilers for Ender's Game.
Sorry. For those of you who haven't seen Ender's Game or read it. But yeah, so then, he has to deal with the consequences of the morality of that. But here's the thing. What is the moral right in that situation? Because in reality, they are achieving their goal, and obviously it depends on what the goal is and all that kind of stuff. But if those lives are going to be lost in battle anyway, to lose, even though you're deciding which lives to lose, their loss gains victory. So it depends on where you attribute the moral value, right? Was it in victory, and what does victory mean? So there's too many subjective truths that have to now be injected in just these basic questions. Because now, like, for the instance, the computer screen. Looking at a computer screen, you got 1 and 5. You're attributing those to life, but they have no value to you, right? Or they have no, let's say, no worth to you. You don't know them. You don't care about them. It's just a number on a screen. But here's the thing. Now you're attributing life to a number value.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, it's like, well, it's still immoral to choose between those because that's not a choice that you should have, right? I mean,
So you would just walk away from the computer.
I guess if that's one of the choices that's afforded to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, it depends on what like the consequences of that are. I mean, I understand when you're going to be faced with tough moral quandaries that you have to figure out, and some of them are just lesser of two evils, which means you have to choose an evil. The thing about what Spock is saying is that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and it's like, well, yeah, but it depends on what you mean by needs. What do you mean by needs? Because you have to attribute that value in order to better figure out what this equation deals with.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a simple. It's not just a simple numerical equation. It's, well, what are we dealing with here? Because he says that in the context of Kirk in one of the versions, Kirk sacrificing himself to save the crew of the ship.
No, he sacrifices himself. Spock does.
In the original one.
Yeah.
Kirk sacrificed himself in the remake. So I mean, it depends on which one you're talking.
Oh, okay,
but
sure.
either, whatever. Point is that's the argument he poses. And it's the same thing for Kirk's dad, because he sacrifices himself with the ship in order to save hundreds of lives.
Yeah.
But I had an argument that countered that, and I'm going to close with that. But let's go through a couple more examples. So we added in a couple of values with the trolley system.
Okay, yeah.
One of which was like, okay, so if you have a trolley and it's coming, and it's going towards 5 criminals, or no, it's going towards your friend, you can change the direction to hit 5 criminals. So now you're inputting subjective truths, because now you have to insert your opinion into this equation, which is inherently what you have to do with these moral quandaries. But now you say, okay, obviously I'm going to want to save my friend over a group of 5 criminals that I don't know and don't care about.
Yeah, sure.
But why is their lives, all 5 of them, worth less than the one friend?
Well, for me, it doesn't matter if they're criminals or whatever. I mean, the other side of people could be like, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. If I know the one person on the other side and that's a good person, they're my friend, I'm just saving them. It's the end of story. Because for me, I can't be held accountable for what I don't know. I mean, I can, I suppose, but I just don't know it. I'm only one person. And it's like, if I pull the lever, I could save Mother Teresa, but I could also save Hitler. And am I going to want to take that risk? You know what I mean? So it's just like, I don't have enough information. But if I have a chance to save my friend, well, then I guess I ought to do that.
So now you have a bit of information that is inherently subjective, but it's information you can work with.
Yeah, I can work with that information. Like if it was you, yeah, I suppose there's a chance you could become the next Hitler. But I sincerely doubt that. Yeah, it's like, it's absurd, right? Like there's no... The likelihood of that is just like, it's impossible. There's no way that scenario could come about without like some
extreme. He has no idea what I do late at night.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, just late at night. Think about
my plan is coming into place.
People. Yeah, but I mean, it's sort of like, this is what I do know, and I act on that, and it's kind of it may suck for the other group of people, but
Sorry.
I just don't know you. So if it was someone different, then maybe they could save you. And I don't know how many people that would need to be. But it's also like, put it this way, like let's suppose like the one person I save, what if that person ends up becoming like, some Mother Teresa or whatever? Or what if they have like 20 kids and then those 20 kids have like, it's like if they had 20 kids, that's enough. I'm already up plus 15 people by the math. So it doesn't matter.
But this is all unknown math. This is math that you have to wait to figure out. And this is also math that you can't equate to the ones that are lost. Because what if those other 5 people each have 15? You know what I mean?
But what if they all have one? Or what if like, one of them has one of them can't have kids, one of them dies anyways because they had terminal cancer.
What if the one you save has survivor's guilt so bad that he offs himself later anyway?
Right. So like they all had this catastrophic scenario. And I saved them for what? Saved? I didn't save anything.
He just goes and lays back on the train track.
I just killed my friend for no reason. Just because I thought I was altruistic.
You're like, I saved you. You're like, I know.
Can't take it.
I hate it. But also, you. The one thing that I dislike about this whole argument is, okay, so there's the element of just the value of the lives, right?
Sure.
If you're going to look at it just without any other factors, sure, 5 is more than 1. Sure. We'll just make it a mathematical equation. But the factor that they're putting in here is the switch. So now they're taking away this, natural process, however natural it is to be laying on train tracks in this fashion, to now give you the decision. So now you're not inherently choosing to kill someone. You're choosing to not kill someone. But that decision indirectly leads to other people dying. So in reality, you're still making a moral decision that could be construed as immoral because you are still leading to the death of people.
Yes.
So therefore, like, now you're taking that natural action, whatever, that natural progression of events, we'll call it, and putting in your choice. So that's what it's adding into the scenario. So now, not only are you taking the fact that, you're forced with this weird decision, but you're going to have to live with the consequences that ensue from that.
Yeah.
Because you are now part of the situation directly.
Yes.
Which, again, could lead to any number of consequences. Like, let's say you have so much guilt from doing this thing, from allowing these people to die, that you end up, like, being abusive to your child, and then he grows up to be the next Hitler. So now he kills millions of people. So your decision now has led to the death of millions.
Yeah, it's like this total. See, but you have to always make your decisions based on what you know
in the moment.
Well, for everything that you know, like you can't. It's not fair to tell yourself like, 10 years ago I should have made this other decision. Maybe, but 10 years ago you didn't have the knowledge of what the consequences were of those 10 years. So if you don't have the knowledge of the consequence, how is it so much the burden of your prior self, or rather the current self, to feel guilty over it? Maybe it's the burden of the prior self to make the best decision they can.
Right.
But the self in the future, that's the one who has to just deal with whether or not they're going to feel guilty about it. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's let's attribute a couple of questions real quick, and then I'll end with an argument. So the questions we got to ask are, where do we attribute value?
Okay.
And which one is the objective standard? Because all we've discovered within this argument is that it requires subjective standards, subjective realities, subjective truths.
Yeah, so let's create a more realistic scenario. It's a ship, and it's sinking. You've only got one life raft. It's not a big crew, but there's a number of people on it. So who gets to go on the life raft? You can only choose a fraction. We'll say 10% or whatever. So I think naturally most people would assume like, all right, well, women and children are getting on that life raft.
Sure.
And that's obviously assigning more value to women and children. But I feel like those are two really easy questions, and that's been done throughout human history, and I see no reason to challenge that.
That's fair. Raises the question of whether, like, again, where's value? Because I understand there's arguments to be made, like, okay, the women can propagate the species, but also they might protect the children can't protect themselves. But
Yeah.
intrinsically, that means that the men have to sacrifice themselves. But in
Yeah.
sacrificing themselves, do they not have more value because they're doing that for them?
Yeah. They don't have as much value.
No, they do have more value because they're choosing.
Oh, because they're choosing to sacrifice. But the value is being passed on to everyone else.
Sure.
Is
Philosophically, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of absorbing it. Because the thing is like the kids haven't had a chance to live their life, whereas like we're adults, we clearly have, so we have to go down with the ship.
But then I could say, I've lived life. I have those experiences which give value to my life.
They
haven't
give value
had all
to
those-
you.
They give value to me, sure, but that might add value to someone else that I can share it with. Whereas a kid hasn't had those experiences yet, so he has less value.
That's true, but it's
I'm getting on the boat. Get out of the way, kid.
It's just, but it's kind of like I'm not going to take away a kid's chance to have, because here's the thing. So let's say
I'm shoving
you've
him in
lived
the
a great
water.
if you've lived a great life, then you've lived a great life. And like I'm sorry it gets cut a little short, but let's let someone else have a chance at life, right? Now let's say you've lived a terrible life. Well, then now I'm doing you a favor because you don't have to live this terrible life anymore. You're
I'm ending
spared.
it for you. You're welcome.
So
Here's a
you're
ticket
free
in.
either way. Okay, so and then the other one goes back to needs, and you brought up a good example. You're like, well, like what about like people in the 1800s? They thought they had a need for slaves. Is that now an
Right.
important thing that we have to the needs of the many?
Right.
What about the needs of the few that were slaves?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Do they not have needs that contradict yours?
But again, that goes back to the question: what are needs?
Exactly.
So, like, they need freedom.
Okay, so here's another one I propose. It's abstract. Do 99 people live and 1 die, or do 100 people die?
Do I get to kill that one person?
No, they just have to die so that the 99 can live.
Okay. Again, if you're just assigning it to a numerical value, who's living?
Exactly.
Is it Hitler? Then I guess we'll just kill all the 100.
Well, it's just like the
Better
Spock
100 than a
scenario.
million.
Well, put it in the Spock scenario, because that's the thing is, in that situation, Spock goes and he sacrifices himself to save everybody on the Starship Enterprise. So it's the crew. So he has some reasonable measurement of those people
Sure.
and, the kind of...
Again, subjective reality.
It's
Yep.
subjective,
Yep.
but, I mean, you have to use that as the whole idea,
Well, human nature.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's close with this.
Yeah, so, like, tell me about that Spock argument then. Right? Like, Spock makes the right choice, right? He sacrifices himself. The Enterprise gets to live. Because in the 100 die scenario, he dies with them is the thing.
Right.
So that's why I'm like, well, let's isolate him, because that's essentially the equation. Why would you ever choose 100 people die? But you're gonna have a reason that explains why it would be better to have 100 people die. So tear it away.
I like that. That's how you phrase this argument.
That's how I
You
interpret.
called it a good point earlier, and now it's like, well,
It is a great point. The 100 people should die. Now-
they should. You guys don't deserve this. So my point was that if Spock is the one who has chosen to sacrifice himself to save the rest of the crew, does that not make his life equal, if not greater, to the value of all the lives that he's saving in the moment? Because he's the one choosing to sacrifice himself to save them.
So by saving them, he's made himself the value of those people
Exactly.
+1 because he's dying in the process.
Right. So he is more valuable than all of the people he saved. But here's the thing, that if he, because he's a logical being, so if he reasons that out and he's like, oh yeah, well then I shouldn't sacrifice myself, because now, like,
Because the math is actually off.
the math is off. What's left is less valuable than what destroyed itself. So then I wouldn't kill myself. But then by not killing himself, he is therefore not making that decision and therefore not that valuable. So now he's stuck in a quandary.
So it just cancels out.
So it cancels itself out constantly. So he's just like, well, I don't know what to do now. So then he just shoots himself and let fate take its course to the rest of them.
Be like, I'm making a decision for me, you guys. It's like the person who jumps off the boat and just is like, I'm going to take my chances swimming. I don't need
You
the
guys
boat.
do your
I don't
thing.
need the raft. It's just me in the water, me in the
my own
elements. That's
choices.
it.
So there you go. Thank you for watching.